All right, so on this call, I have a great friend and a expert regarding estate and uh, wills and just planning regarding trust and things like that. His name's Andrew Mims. If you can see him on here, he's on our call right now. And I'd like to, if that's okay with you, Andrew, for a second, I'd like to just allow the first 5 or 6, 7, 10 minutes just for real estate first, and then jump over to um, what you can provide for our members. Essentially, that's really
Yeah.
the main focus of this call. Essentially, for everybody is, when I got started, everyone talks about LLCs. That's important. You got to have limited liability company, that whole thing. Andrew will go a little bit deeper, especially as I hope all of us are going to aspiring to be higher net worth individuals. We have families, that kind of stuff that's important to all of us. Andrew's going to get into those details and those weeds and how everyone's circumstances are a little bit different and unique, but he can provide maybe a solution to everyone's individual circumstances. So before we get into that, before I introduce you, Andrew, I'd like to just uh, blanket the next 5 or 6 minutes for real estate. If anybody's got anything going on, and of course, and I'll say this too, Zane, and I'll let you jump in too, Zane. Hey, Grant, what's up? How you doing? I see Grant there too. I like to again, if you have a real estate, the focus on this call really is not so much real estate. It's about how to protect the shit that we've owned or purchased, right? Like that's the point. And Andrew's really good at it. So if you do have a real estate deal, a transaction, something else that's going on the sideline that we want to talk about, we can bring it up in the next 5 or 6 minutes. But the point here is, if you've got something that you're working on, I really would like to, Zan and I would like to get with you offline on this particular call, right? Like next week and the week after, like everything like that would be great. But this call is, I would really like to focus on what Andrew can provide to all of our members and essentially protecting us in case of the what if. So, Zane, do you have any initial thoughts or questions as we're kind of going into this?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of members are working on some really awesome stuff. I know John Blanford's got a deal he's got locked up. I just worked with Greg on a new deal he's looking at. Richard's about to close on his deal that he's working
Yeah,
on.
that's sick.
And yeah, that's awesome. And we can talk about all that stuff, like you said, on a different call. But like you said, Nolan, I think if somebody has some questions about their real estate deals, or maybe if they've done a deal and they want to ask some questions to Andrew, I'm sure it would be great. Like after he does, I'm not sure if he has something to present or something like that, but either way, if he wants to open it up to questions or something like that, that'd be great for everybody to just ask about their own personal deals too, if
Yeah,
possible.
that would be great. And I know, hey Barbara, how you doing? It's great to have you on as well. I know that. Uh, I mean, well, I just if you're not opposed to it, I know Barbara and Richard, they're about to close on a deal here in like 10 days. It's just crazy exciting. I mean, Barbara just joined a couple of months ago, and she's already closing a multi-million-dollar deal, which is like just really cool. So that's
Yeah,
that's awesome. That's a great accomplishment. So congratulations on that. Does
thank you.
anybody have a well, actually, how about this real quick before we jump into it? Barbara, I would just ask your opinion, like what has the experience been in regards to this one particular deal, as you're going into, the new year and everything and what you're trying to accomplish?
My experience with it, um,
Yeah, I mean, so
it's
far with
been
Richard
great.
and the getting the mortgage and the lease and all that kind of song and dance. I mean, it takes some effort, but it's worth it always.
It's worth it. It's I think a lot of it has to do, like most things, how good your partner is. And Richard's just like on the ball,
Yeah,
and yeah, it's been a great experience. There's always some surprises, and
sure.
it's always going to be a little bit more work than you think it might be, but if it was easy, everyone would do it too.
That's right.
So that's
Nothing is ever
okay.
as passive as what we want it to be or hope to be, but it's it's a learning experience too. I mean, you're getting into a deal that maybe, you know, a lot of other people would have never got their eyes on. So I think that's cool. That's great.
Yeah, I don't think I could have found it. I remember you had a video saying by the time it gets to the internet, it's almost a dead thing. Like you guys are so fast that,
Especially on LoopNet. Yeah, on LoopNet, especially anybody the deals on LoopNet go to die, basically. That's what
oh,
they
that's
say.
what you said. Yeah.
That's it.
But it's been great.
Oh, I love
Ready
it.
for
No,
another one.
well, we got to keep on moving the ball down the field.
Yeah.
No, that's great. No, thank you for being here. All right, so here's what I'd like to do again, and again, for everybody that has a real estate deal, please hit me up on this is the one call where I would really like to focus on our state attorney and planner Andrew Mims, who is an attorney down in Lafayette, Louisiana, a great friend, incredibly sharp, super smart, a great partner that when I speak with Andrew, he's just wicked sharp. He just knows what he's talking about. And I would like to introduce him because for all of us, Andrew, very simply, we're all in the real estate business. We're all at least we own property or we're going to own property.
Right.
And what you offer um, can not only just enhance our returns, but protect what we own as well. So for everybody that's on here, Andrew Mims is a fantastic estate attorney. And I'd like to turn it over to you, man. And you can take this however you like, spin it, whatever. But maybe even after the 20 or so minutes that you speak, whether you want to share your screen or whatever, maybe open some questions on some individual circumstances and how people can reach out to you otherwise, and then begin, working directly with you, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And thank you, Nolan, for
Awesome.
for having me. I always like to speak to to different groups. I do this quite frequently, but I love speaking to entrepreneurs. I love speaking to business owners. I like people that hustle. That's me. I have this law firm in Louisiana, Oak Grove Estate Planning. I have a law firm consulting business. My wife and I own another business or two. So like I'm an entrepreneur just like y'all. And it's always good for me to visit with other entrepreneurs and just give them some knowledge and some help. Particularly when it comes to the things that you're working hard for, building wealth, investing in real estate. Nolan is such a solid guy with such great advice, and I'm sure and I know it's been very helpful for all of y'all. And it's great to do all this work, but what I do every day with families, with business owners that I work with, is all about planning for the worst and hoping for the best. So a lot of days when I get home for work, my wife is like, you have to turn off like attorney mode because I kind of come in glass half empty, thinking about the worst. I'm like, I'm sorry, like that's my job. Like if I don't do that, if I don't think about the worst things that could happen, then I'm doing a disservice to my clients. I'm doing a disservice to the business owners, the people that they employ, the property that they own. And so particularly, when it comes to real estate investment, having assets, things like that, what I wanted to do first off is just talk about what the risks are. There's some things that you may have thought about, maybe some things that you haven't. Establishing what the risks are being in this space, being a real estate investor. And then after talking about the risk, let's talk about some solutions. Let's talk about ways that we can reduce that risk. Let's talk about some ways that we can give all of you some peace of mind, and that'll just further embolden each of you, give you more confidence to continue to invest in more properties, to continue to grow. The last thing that we want is for any of these risks to come into play, and to go from there. So I'm going to speak for a few minutes on this, but then definitely at the end, want to open it up to questions. And a lot of questions I'll be able to answer, talk about them. Some questions, if it's a very like specific question about, specific property and things like that, sometimes like for those, and it's not to just have like the lawyer answer, but it depends. But a lot of times it does depend. And we could definitely take the conversation offline, get some more information, and can definitely give you some specific advice about your specific situation. But again, these things are going to apply to everybody. And again, let's start with risk. They fall into, I put them in four buckets. The first one is going to be creditor claims. And so within creditor claims, that could be, again, someone putting a lien against the property that you own. Creditor claims in that bucket, I include liability, like business liability. If we're in Louisiana, and I know in Alabama where Nolan lives, you drive up and down the interstate, there's billboards for personal injury attorneys everywhere. We live in a very high lawsuit driven industry, so having you causing an accident, making sure LLCs, different things like that are set up. Could be employee, could somebody be visiting your property, it could be, leasing the property and if those agreements are correct. But the potential for having, again, liability that could, someone seizing these assets that you worked hard to protect. Um, Divorce, I'll put that in a creditor claim category. If you're divorced, states are different. Some states, Louisiana is a community property state, most states aren't. But divorce, potentially having a spouse that has a claim in any kind of business and ways to plan for that. If you have a business partner, what happens if the business partner that you have passes away or they get divorced, wanting to or having to do business with the spouse of like a business partner. And then tax claims with regard to unpaid property taxes, things like that. So that's kind of that first bucket of issues that are out there. And particularly when it comes to, like I said, lawsuits, things like that. It's just happening more and more. And a lot of these things, again, planning for the worst, hoping for the best. We need to account for all of these situations where potentially could be some type of claim against you in your business, the property that you own. The next kind of risk area that I look at with clients when they own businesses, when they have properties, is the tax implications. So this is when I talk about taxes, this is income taxes. At this point, this could be income taxes after you pass away, estate taxes, planning for that and doing the things that we can do to minimize and reduce as much tax as possible now, but also in the future whenever this property is passed to your loved ones. So that's the second threat, like the second risk area that we need to look at. Third is going to be something I'll call it living probate. What that means is, again, everyone here, we're healthy, we're not having any medical issues, but any one of you here, let's say you have an accident and you have a brain injury, getting older, having Alzheimer, dementia, some kind of medical situation where you lose the capacity to run your business, you lose the capacity to sign paperwork, you lose the capacity to do anything with regard to the business you built up. What happens? How is that addressed? Who can step in and fill your shoes to make sure that the business can move forward, or that the business can be sold, or that it can be, passed on to your family? A lot of people don't think about that. A lot of people will plan and put insurance in place and do an LLC, but there's certain tools and different things that we can do to help to that situation. This happens very commonly. Recently, a son and daughter came to me in the 30s, 40s. The dad owns a business. Dad has a stroke. He's going to be fine. He's going to make it, but he can't talk. He's paralyzed, but he's the only one that can sign checks for the business. He's the only person that can do payroll. He's the only person authorized to talk to the insurance agent. The son and daughter work within the business, but again, they didn't plan for incapacity of their dad. They didn't have that set up. They had some of this other stuff set up, but living probate, again, so that's just if you're incapacitated while owning assets, owning a business, what do we do? There are some solutions that I'll talk about in a little bit. And then the fourth big threat and big risk is going to be, for all of us when we pass away. Good, bad, or ugly. A lot of people, we don't like to have these conversations. It's tough. It's not fun. But the stats are still there. 100% of people, all of us are going to pass away at some point. And so having a plan in place to protect those assets that you've worked hard for in the event of you passing away is absolutely required and absolutely necessary. And there's different ways to do it. And planning appropriately, again, we could set it up to where it to be very private. It's going to be done, to where it's passed to the people that you want. There's ways to reduce creditor exposure by having things set up appropriately versus it being public and going through probate, and all kinds of things there. But again, a lot of us just, looking at the people on this call, it's kind of a very varied ages, varied backgrounds, but still all of us, regardless of your age, if you're taking the time, the energy, the money to invest in anything, to have any kind of business, real estate, we have to acknowledge that these threats exist, the creditor claims, tax risk, living probate, being incapacitated, and then our own death, and then planning accordingly. Um, so again, how do we address these different problems? There's lots of different tools to do it. And the good news is that there are tools, there are solutions to address all of these issues. Um, and a lot of times, again, it's going to be a catered approach with clients, and just depending on what their assets are, where they're located, what their family's like, and even what their goals are, because people have different goals in this. Some people may be building a business, but they don't have any desire to pass the business on to their children. Maybe their children are doing something else, but they want their children to receive the income from it. That's different versus if you have a son that you want to take over the business, little things like that. Um, but in terms of, let's just kind of go through the risks one by one. And what I'm going to do is just kind of give out some just general recommendations, some general suggestions of how to address these risks. So first
Before
off,
you get rolling, Andrew, I'd like to make one quick statement too. So the reason
yeah,
why that this is important, and I would say this is, I'll give you a quick story. When I was in spring training, I was playing in the minor leagues. I was in big league camp a couple of times. Trying to get to the show, I was a nobody, right? Jay Do knows a little bit about that when I was, trying to get to the big leagues. But the thing is, in spring training, every single year they do the same. You basically have like meetings every single morning on something like, oh, financial advisor does this, hey, prostate cancer for that, how to go, and if you need to go, I'm trying to even like estate planning attorney, like they had all of these meetings during spring training. So I would say that these first couple of calls in January like this, in my opinion, sets the tone for all of us to take action for the rest of the year. So I don't look at this as like, okay, this isn't about real estate. I look at this as like the foundation, is what we always talk about, like Zan and I always talk about. It's like this is the foundation that we're able to build on as we are going forward. So like anytime I'm talking to Andrew, it's always about, we're always buying property creatively, getting debt, whatever. But what he's talking about really, in my opinion, is like the most valuable piece. Like we're all investing because we want to not only just have passive income and financial freedom, but we're trying to create a legacy too. Like that's a big, to me, I got 3 kids. Like to me, that's a piece. So for everybody on here, that's a unique circumstance, and like they have a different opinion. But what Andrew's talking about is valuable, not just because like, okay, we're just checking a box about estate planning, but because what he's talking about is valuable, and we have an expert regarding how to couple it with real estate investment. So that's my opinion. That's why I think this is like so cool. I feel like I'm on in spring training again. I wish I wouldn't have not cared so much back then, but now I'm like, okay, I'm dialed in on what you have to say. So just making that statement, Andrew.
yeah, I love that. And it's so true because, yes, a big part of this is tied to business and everything else. But even for people that don't have businesses, a lot of this, friends, family members that you have, a lot of these key parts of an estate plan are important for them too. It just happens to be that being in business, yeah, we need to make sure that those things are accounted for. And a lot of people don't think to do that. That they may even visit with an attorney that sets up like a basic will or something like that, not even asking them questions about their business. A new client that signed up last week with me, they had wills, they had some of the stuff in place. I'm like, well, tell me how your business fits in. Like, where's the operating agreement? Where's the insurance? Where's everything? And they're like, well, we don't have that. Like the attorney didn't bring that up. So that has to be, part of this planning. Um, and so really, yeah, to kind of go over these different threats, and I'll kind of just again loop this into different solutions. And I'm gonna go a little bit out of order of what I brought up, but the first one is to avoid issues with a living probate, so with incapacity. Um, Gave those examples, talked about the gentleman with the stroke with the kids. Again, he hadn't passed away, but the business is frozen, like things are stopped. So how do we prevent that for each of you? How do we make it to where that doesn't happen? Again, we can't control a lot of medical things. We can't control some of these emergencies, but the main thing there to help with that is to have powers of attorney in place. So we want to have documents in place. And what we do a separate medical, separate financial power of attorney, but having these powers of attorney in place that states, yeah, in the event of me being incapacitated, I'm naming my wife, I'm naming my husband, friend, business partner, whoever it is, to be able to step in my shoes and make certain decisions. Yes, some of them could be related to the business, but other decisions could be related to healthcare. So, we keep those separate, and we can even go through the particular things like in a financial power of attorney and have like personal financial decisions separate from business. Like we highly customize all of this. But it's important to have because if incapacity does come into play, we don't have these documents in place. The only solution, in which what I'm having to do with the family I talked about earlier, is we're having to go to court and we're having to do a guardianship proceeding. And where a court and a judge is going to have to appoint a doctor, medical professionals to evaluate the gentleman that had the stroke. And then there's a hearing where anyone can come, and anyone who's interested who thinks they'd be the best person to be the guardian for the gentleman comes into play. It's expensive, it's messy, it's public. And again, but just by signing powers of attorney ahead of time is going to stop that. It's going to prevent that to where if that comes into play, we have a plan, we have people named, and all of our planning, we have backups too. We just won't pick one person. We have backups because what happens if the main person we've selected to make certain decisions, what happens if they pass away? What happens if it's a business partner and you're on a trip and you both get injured, something like that. So we want to have backups. But with this and with any of this other type of planning, it's something that we do want to go back to and reevaluate over time. Because again, the people that you make in those selections for those positions, that may change. So we want to update that. Beyond the powers of attorney, something else that's important, particularly if you're in business with a partner. If it's just you, that's one thing. But if you're in business with a partner, making sure that we have in the operating agreement, making sure that we have in the documents that govern the business entity, in the case of incapacity, who's going to be doing what. So not only just the power of attorney, but outlining certain things if that's the case. So that's one of the things I look at with business owners to see what makes the most sense. It's easy to do paperwork beforehand, but if incapacity comes in, major risks that can cause major problems with families. When it comes to taxes, so again, that's another one of the big four risks. There's some things that could be done creatively through estate planning that can reduce taxable income now. There's some great things that Nolan does with some of the things that he does, the suggestions that can do that. There's also some creative things that we can do through estate planning, through setting up different trusts and having different mechanisms to reduce taxable income now, even beyond what a CPA, other people would recommend. That area of what we do is very, very fact specific and very detailed about the assets that you have and everything else. So that's really a case by case basis that we could look at and determine if there's a plan there. But the other part of the taxes is, yeah, estate taxes, what that looks like. What we want to do is with whatever estate that you have, business, personal assets, to do everything we can to set it up to where your family's going to have to pay the least amount or maybe even zero estate taxes after you pass away. So every state by state, has different estate taxes. Some states have zero. So in Louisiana, we no longer have an estate tax. State by state, it varies and it's different. California, New York has a very high estate tax on a state level. Federally, there is an estate tax, but it's gone up. And so for an individual, so if an individual passes away as of 2026, any assets under $15 million, there's no estate tax on. If it's over 15 million, that's when estate tax kicks in on that dollar over 15 million. For a couple, it's 30 million. But again, even though that's the case, there's creative ways through, again, structuring businesses, setting up trust, to where we can avoid, having to pay estate tax. Elon Musk, if he were to die tomorrow, he would not pay any federal estate tax because he has good attorneys, he has good CPAs, he has good insurance folks to where they have that set up to avoid. But if you don't plan for it, that's a risk that your family has, that you've worked hard, you've built up a business, you're trying to transfer this wealth to them, but you're going to be hit with some taxes, which again, if we plan creatively, we can avoid that. So that's the second threat. Going back to creditor claims, that's what I brought up first. Lots of different tools that we can use there to protect your assets on the front end. The biggest level of defense up front, if you think about it's like a castle, you have your castle, you have your different walls and moats. The first line of defense that you want to have is adequate insurance. So adequate insurance to protect the assets that you have, whether it's buildings, any kind of equipment, liability insurance for your business, to have the most robust insurance as possible, covering every aspect of your business. Now, some things that people overlook in terms of insurance is even like cyber, like liability insurance. What happens if someone hacks into your business computer, that hacks into your company records, bank stuff, steals your information? Like, that's something to think about. So having that insurance is the big first line of defense for any type of risk there. Beyond insurance, and Nolan, you talked about this at the get-go, using business formation, using LLCs. Now every single state has an LLC statute where that can be set up to hold real estate, to put businesses in. Again, there's different schools of thought and different ways on how to do that. Um, Even, state by state, property by property, business by business. But that's a great way to personally insulate yourself in your non-business assets, your personal items, in the event that something happens. Even separating and segregating different buildings potentially, or different businesses, having all that separated and clean with specific bank accounts, with specific insurances, all the things that are needed to where, again, if you have a kid who's 16 and calls as a wreck, you don't want the person who is injured, to sue you to try to get the business. So again, there's things that we can set up insurance wise, LLC wise, to do that. Beyond that, there's some other things we can do too with trust. I'm going to talk a little bit about trust, about avoiding taxes and reducing taxes. There's other things that we can do with trust with regard to asset protection. It's just another layer of defense, another layer of protection. Um, also in there, with the creditor claims, I brought up divorce. That's another thing to account for, whether that's a prenup, a postnup, property agreements. Every situation's different. It could be, someone on the call here, like, or myself. My wife and I are high school sweethearts, and we've been together for a long time. Some people, may be newly married. Some people, it may be a second marriage, and you have kids and adult stepkids. But that's something that we talk about. We get to that level of detail to learn more about your family, to see what we need to do to insulate it from any particular issues. Um, so there's lots of creative ways to do it to set you up for success there. That last big threat, again, is going to be, tied to your death. We talked about taxes and estate taxes with your death, but we want to make sure that your wealth not only has the least amount of taxes that's going to come from transferring that to your children, transferring that to loved ones, but we want to make sure that process is done smoothly, privately, and very cost effective. Um, of our practice is about 75% planning and to help prevent issues later on. 25% of my practice is helping families after someone has passed away, and a lot of times just cleaning up the messes when things weren't handled appropriately. There's so many things that can be done from a planning perspective. One, to make the transfer of property as smooth as possible, whether that's to a spouse, to children, whoever it may be. There's ways we can avoid probate. for personal and business assets to where we can keep this out of court, not having to wait on a judge, not having to wait months or years for these things to be finalized to transfer. Um, Staying out of probate, we can keep it private. When you go to probate, you're having to file a list of all of your assets and what they're worth. And that's public to where anyone can go to the courthouse, can see those different things. Having everything set up and structured through a trust, completely private. Um, the time, even the expense, the expense costs in setting up trust and having things organized that way, it's a cheaper solution than going through probate one day, than having to have that transition. Um, it's going to reduce so much more conflict. With trust, we can allocate different things. We can indicate, even like for our kids. One of the things I love about having things set up through trust is, if anyone here has minor kids or even kids that are young adults, the last thing we would want is, let's say I passed away, I would not want my 18-year-old son to immediately inherit hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars. I think about when I was 18 years old, the dumb stuff I would do with that, or inherit a business, something
What?
like that,
No way.
without
I
any
would never
guardrails
do
in
anything with
place.
that. I would never go to the bar. I would never go buy. I would never do anything like that. No way.
Yeah,
Nobody
I
here
don't
would
believe
ever do anything like that. No chance.
ne never, never. But so again, through proper planning, we can set it up to where, yeah, because in every state in the United States at 18, you're recognized to be an adult. And so with that, they could, yeah, you could leave them a business, but they could sell the properties. You could leave them life insurance proceeds and they could do really dumb stuff with it. Through a trust, we can structure that. We can set it up to say, hey, you know what? At age 25, you would get a certain amount of money. Or, hey, I want to set up to where my kids, they could have $100,000 to go towards a down payment of a house. There's limitless options, again, to protect and maintain that wealth over time and not just have your kids blow it right out of the gate. So that's another risk, with coming to death, that you've worked so hard to prepare everything for your kids, and then something like that happens. Um, Younger kids, young adults, that's an issue concern. But a lot of times too, I'm working with families where they may have adult children that have some other risks or some other things we need to consider. A family I'm working with right now, parents, they're in their 60s, they have kids at 30 or 40 years old, four kids. One of the kids, he's 35 years old, has a major substance abuse issue. So they were like, hey, we just want to disinherit our son because we don't want him getting money and then just overdosing, like killing himself. We're able to plan for that through a trust to where we can set aside money for him, have a trustee manage it so that he can still be provided for versus putting him in harm's way. We can plan for families that have a special needs child, or maybe in the future, like a kid has a medical emergency, where they're protected, where that money is kept safe and controlled only for them. Um, so that's just a fear that so many people have. Again, you worked hard, but what happens after I go? You want to maintain the wealth, you want to protect it from young kids, but also from kids that may have behavioral issues, mental health issues, or even developmental issues. So all of those risks, all of these things that we talked about can be prevented. That's the good news. The main tools, yeah, powers of attorney, wills, trusts in certain situations. Lots of tools out there. The insurance, the business formation, the proper business organization documents. Um, there's some scary stuff we talked about, but again, the good news is that there's a solution to address all of those. That's the biggest thing that I do for a job. Again, I think negatively, thinking about the worst case scenario, but what I'm really doing for my clients and the people we work with is giving them that peace of mind and that courage to move forward and to continue to hustle, to continue to be an entrepreneur and not have to worry about those things. Because again, when life happens, and eventually it'll show up in different forms. You take the time to plan, you take the time to get things put into place, it's going to work out a lot better than when you don't, or if you don't do it adequately or if you don't make the right decisions.
Yeah. I go a step further for everyone, and then we'll open this up to questions if that's okay with you, Andrew. It's,
Yeah.
for me, when I set up my trust initially, it sounds silly to say this, but for me, it allowed, I've always kind of been an outgoing risk taker, like, trying to stretch, like the rest of us in our group, we're all trying to find a way. I think for me, once I had everything set up, I had my life insurance policies dialed in, I had all the trust, like the buildings in the trust, all that stuff. For me, it gave me more of a sense of confidence to go out there and to take not so much risk, but calculated risk and have a more calculated approach on when I'm purchasing property. Because before, when I just kind of had everything everywhere, LLCs all over the map, it's cool because you're gang banging, you're doing deals, but if you don't have everything set up and I got hit by a bus or I ended up getting abducted by aliens, well then everybody and their brother that's partners with me is in trouble. So having all this kind of stuff set up allowed me to have everything underneath one hood. My wife, again, she can go to Cabo and drink Mai Tais with that you know, pool boy if she wanted to, I guess, at that point. But most importantly, she's the everything is all under one plate. They don't have to deal with probate and dealing with Uncle Sam and going through that whole song and dance. So no, Andrew, that is really great. Does anybody, again, we got 25 minutes basically ballpark. I like to open this up to some questions. Maybe Zane, if you'd like to maybe lead something off without putting you on the spot, just some questions for and open it up for everybody. But a question or thought that you might have for Andrew to lead it off.
Yeah, well, I was wondering just because I work with a lot of the new members that are first starting on their journey to acquire commercial real estate. Maybe they've done residential in the past, maybe they haven't. But what would you recommend for somebody just starting who may not have a property under their belt yet, but is preparing to do that? What would you recommend they like look towards or do research on, or maybe even set up right now rather than, wait?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, and I think with a lot of this, again, mentioned lots of different tools and solutions to address these problems. But like right out of the gate, I think everyone should have powers of attorney in place. You know, of course, over time, maybe those get edited, maybe they're changed, and tied more to business operating agreements tied to specific properties. But that's just even personally. Again, that's something that people just that don't realize. Is that yeah, if there's a medical emergency, a lot of people think, okay, well, my wife can automatically make a medical decision. Or if you're not married, oh, well, my parents or my brother, they're going to go to the hospital and they're going to be able to make decisions or call the bank or call my insurance company. That's not automatic. The whole idea of like next of kin is not a thing anymore. The only way that a another individual is going to be able to be there for you is if they're listed on a power of attorney. So that like right out of the gate, number one is something that people should have in place. Um, with regard to anyone here that has minor children, having, we haven't talked about this yet, but if you have minor children, having guardianships designated, having that in place. If you don't, then the court in whatever state you live in, a judge is going to decide who watches your kids. Those are two big things right there. If anyone has kids here that are young adults that are over 18, at 18, they're legally adults. And at that point, if they were in an accident, if they had some type of medical situation, you couldn't they couldn't share information, the doctors and nurses with you at the hospital if your children weren't able to sign paperwork to do that. If they were unconscious, they wouldn't be able to do that. So having just some of these basic foundational documents to help protect everyone now, to help line people up to make decisions, I think are super important. As you buy properties, then at that point we can look at the risk with regards to the creditor risks, that category, lawsuits, liabilities. Then you look at the insurance, then you look at the business organizations, things like that to provide some insulation. But from the get-go, that's a couple of tools out of the gate that everyone, could use.
Awesome.
Nolan, can I ask a question?
Yeah, absolutely.
So Andrew, real quick, if your best friend comes to you and says, "What are the top 3 or 5 documents I need to have in place so that me and my family are protected if I get hit by a bus tomorrow?" Obviously, power of attorney is one of those. You just mentioned that, but Trust.
Yeah.
I mean, what else are we talking about here? What are the main
So I'll
documents we
say,
need to play?
yeah, basic would be, yeah, powers of attorney. We want to have, I always recommend a living will. So a living will is where you make the hard decisions about medical end of life care so that your loved ones don't have to. So
Right.
whether that's organ donation, whether that's being on life support, it's always better for you to make those determinations than to have to put that in the hands of a family member. Last week, I sat and met with a client whose dad passed away. It was a man, big tough guy who used to play college football uh, at McNeese, which is a smaller school in Lake Charles down the road. Big old offensive lineman, and he's crying in my office. He's like, "I knew my dad never wanted to be on life support, but I was the one that had to make that decision and tell the doctor to pull the plug, and it was killing him." Again, a living will prevents all that because you're making those decisions. So powers of attorney, the living will, having something we do, having a HIPAA form, HIPAA paperwork, that's going to allow anyone you list in the case of emergency to talk to a doctor to get information. So, as an example, like on my medical power of attorney, I have my wife as the medical power of attorney to make decisions if I'm unconscious. But a couple weeks ago, she was on a girls' trip in Sedona with some friends. And so if she's out of town, I got in a wreck. My brother, my younger brother, would probably be the first person to the hospital. I don't want him making medical decisions because I've bullied him for most of his life, and he may try to
It's
try to have a little
That's
revenge when
funny.
it comes if I'm in an emergency. But he would probably be the first person to the hospital. And since I have him, some other family members listed on the HIPAA paperwork, he can go to the hospital. The doctors can talk to him, and he can call my wife and tell her what's going on. So that's another. Again, it's easy, it's simple, but that's a key piece of the puzzle. Beyond those, yeah, at minimum, a will, having a will in place. Yes, there's different types of trust. Those are very fact specific. For a lot of y'all, a trust would be a good decision, avoiding probate and things like that. A little bit more complicated, detailed, but a will is going to help at least to where you can specify who's going to receive what. It's not going to keep you out of probate, but without a will, there's naturally going to be some disputes in place as to who would receive things. Each state is going to have default rules that says, hey, if you don't have a will, this is what happens with your property. So you're able to come in and make those decisions for yourself. So I
That was
would
the
say
main
like those
part.
are the key basic documents I would recommend to people.
okay.
But then again, beyond that, yeah, if you have own a business and commercial properties, everything else, then we can go on from there. If you have a special needs child, if all these other factors come into play, those are additional conversations. But that's the key starting point.
Does it vary by state whether or not a will help you avoid probate? That's a main objective for me is I don't want my family to have to go through probate. So I've always been told you need a trust to avoid probate versus a will. Is that correct?
Correct. So in every
Okay.
state, again, the will you just get to decide who gets what, but you still
Yeah.
have to go through probate. In different states, it's more of a pain than others. But even in Louisiana, where it's one of the easier states, it's still super expensive, a complete pain in the butt, completely public. We have people that, yeah, like a husband and wife, they have a will, which is great. But then one of them passes away since they're having to go through probate. A lot of times, like banks freeze joint bank accounts. A
Right.
family right now who came in on Monday, the lady's husband passed away, and all of their monthly bills are tied to their joint bank account that they both own. And it got frozen. And they're like, no, we need a judgment of possession from the court in order to unfreeze it. And and she's like, that's my account. That's my money too. But since it's tied to someone who died, the bank doesn't know if it's tied to if there's a will or not, or if the husband wanted to leave money from that checking account to somebody. And it's a mess. But yeah, trust avoids all of that because under the trust, particularly the different types of trust, but the trust that would help with that situation, revocable living trust. Under that scenario, either spouse dies, nothing changes. The other spouse has immediate access to assets. Nothing goes through probate. They continue on. It's, obviously they're grieving. It's a sad time, but from a legal financial standpoint, there's no problems there. And even if you do have businesses or commercial properties, we loop all that into the plan and into the trust. And so the spouse can act and have access to those resources or do what they need to do, if that's what the wishes are. So that definitely the better way, really the main way to avoid probate for sure.
Looks like David might have a question too. David, what's up, man?
Hey guys. All right, Andrew, I got a question. You talked about guardianship. And so my wife passed away last year, so I had to change my trust and will and a bunch of stuff.
Hmm.
And when it comes to guardianship, um, I don't have any family members that are local. And so we have a group really of close friends. And so I made the decision they would go to some friends of mine that are local that we
Sure.
do things with. But the question is, do you on the financial piece of it, like I pass away, the kids would go to this family, but should
Hmm.
that family still control the finances, or should there be a completely separate person that controls that?
Yeah, so it's really based upon the individuals. And so for me, for an example, we have it set up right now to where my in-laws live here locally. My in-laws are relatively young. So they're still listed to be the guardians for my kids because they would be the best people to raise my kids. They would bring them to the church we'd want them to. They keep them in the same school. They share like our values. In terms of making the best financial decisions, that would not be them. Like, I love my in-laws to death, but they have a different philosophy on money and finances and would blow the money that we've saved for our kids pretty quickly. And it's not that they would spend it on themselves or that they would take the money from our kids, but my mother-in-law has no problem going to Target and spending like 600-700 bucks every time she goes on a bunch of worthless junk.
Wait, is that
You
my
know,
wife or is that anyone else's wife? Or am I just beside
yeah.
myself here or what?
So point being, like it in my situation, I have my in-laws, yes, as the guardians, but my brother is, if something happened to my wife and I, they would be the trustees for my family's trust. My
Yeah.
brother is in IT. He's very good with numbers, tight with money, to where again, like when my kids, I can see my son saying, "Hey, I need a new car. Get me an F-250 King Ranch or a Tesla or this." My brother-in-law would be no. Like, we're gonna fix your car or we're gonna buy you a 2005 Honda Civic. Like, that's kind of yeah, I want to take care of my kids. I want them to have nice stuff. But my in-laws would be like, no, let's get you the truck and let's jack it up and tint the windows and put the sound system. So yeah, so legally it can be the same person, but a lot of these decisions and when I meet with clients, again, we're digging in deeper to the people, who makes the most sense. So sometimes it's okay for the same person who's guardian to control the finances. Other times it doesn't. It really just depends on the individuals.
Yeah, I know. I always get that depends answer, but there's got to be the voice of reason and that share the same values and morals that you have. So that's what I did. It is two different people,
Yeah,
um, but anyway, thank you for the
I'd say
explanation.
I
yeah,
said this too,
absolutely.
David, just to be clear, like when we set up our trust, you know, first of kin, if you want to call that what Andrew was saying, like we put up my brother and my sister or my brother-in-law and sister-in-law, like they're gonna be the ones, but also if it would have been my immediate brother who was we would have never really had my immediate brother be in charge of my kids. It would have been like and
Yeah,
give them all the money and things like that. Like that just would not make sense. You know what I mean? So like you can so the way that this Andrew and the other attorneys would set it up is like you can nitpick exactly how you and I think from our trust, like Andrew, you can go further on this, but like we made the like down to the exact detail on how everything like if I had a bad day, like exactly how it would all roll out. You can make it exactly how you want.
yeah.
That's
No,
the way I
ours
would
is
say it.
pretty detailed.
It's really detailed. And also they ask questions that you would have never really considered in your well maybe I don't know but for my own life it was like well what happens if if someone gets divorced and then somebody else gets divorced like what's going to happen then I'm like damn I've never thought about that
Yeah,
so so they do a
Yeah.
great job on asking questions that you probably have never considered but they're asking those because it's happened to them in the past. Like they've had a client that's experienced that. And it's like, all right, that's good to know because it will most likely happen again. Like, you flip the coin enough times, it's eventually going to happen. So they handle all of the questions down to the detail like that. And it was a great experience for me at least.
Yeah, I agree.
So just a thought.
And I will say they're very affordable and worth it.
Oh,
I
dude. Oh, man.
It's
One
almost one of
thousand
the things
percent.
you can't
Oh
afford
yeah.
not to have or
Oh
put
yeah.
in place. And a
Sure.
lot of and fortunately in my work and our employee benefits have a legal services benefit. So I
Yeah.
was able to do it through all of that and it was probably a lot less. Maybe that's why I'm saying it, but either way, I think it's very worth it for people to do it.
I think it's not only a no-brainer for everybody here, and that's why I'm having Andrew on, is just because the experience I've had and candidly the price, I thought it's a slam dunk home run.
Yeah.
Like the 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 value that I get for the price, you hear Grant Cardone talk about 10x all the time. It's like to me, I feel like the value I got for the price I paid was like absolutely unbelievable. So,
Yeah.
that kind of thing. So, anybody else thoughts, questions, everything like that for Andrew? What I'd like to mention too, and we got 10 or 12 minutes left over here, but I also want to make sure um, that everyone has access to Andrew. And what I'll do as well is I'll update Andrew as our estate attorney expert and our preferred contact. So if and when you guys do come up with something, or you're saying, hey, maybe the time is right for the trust or whatever, you can reach out directly to Andrew. You can have his direct contact. If that's Andrew, if you're all right with that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And what I'll offer to the group here, like anyone through this group, reach out to me and we can set up a consultation. It's complimentary consultation, just to visit with y'all, answer any questions. I can even evaluate and look at your particular situation with your family assets and then give you recommendations. And if you want to work with us and us be the partner to put that in place for you, great. If not, then hey, you've had some time. I've given you some value. You have at least some next steps, as to what to do after that. So definitely offering that to this group.
Are you in Alabama as well?
So I'm in Louisiana, and so we work with partners all around the South. I have different attorneys that work in the South and even across the country that we work with to put some of the local things in place. So, for example, the trust work and stuff like that we can do, we can work with anyone in any state. If we're needing to tie real estate, so let's say that you own a commercial building in Alabama, and we're needing to tie that to your trust, we work with a local, like a real estate attorney, title attorney, just to do the deed paperwork to tie that into the trust. So that's one of the things that we'll do
They don't
locally.
have any issues with being able to execute.
So
Yeah.
if I'm in Texas, you'll still be able to help. Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, you kind of answered my
Yeah.
question. I was going to ask, like, how would you recommend us, finding a state attorney like kind of locally to where we live, but obviously you can do stuff virtually as well, um,
Exactly.
easily.
Yep. hmm Yeah, that's not an issue. And then even for some of the documents, they would need to be notarized. But again, living in another state, that's not an issue. If you have a notary, someone local, you can take it, get notarized, send back to us. Or we have different partners in different states where we can set up appointment. You go into their office, we send them the documents, they notarize it, and then it's taken care of. But everything else we can do virtually. Yeah.
Great. Thank you.
Well, what I'll do for everyone as well is I'll include this video. I'll send an email out to all of us, just recapping this entire video, but also including Andrew's information, so that way you can get on his calendar and have that consultation if it makes sense for what you're trying to accomplish, or just depending upon where you're at. So at least you can get a chance to meet directly with Andrew and like what they can offer and everything like that. So sound good, everyone? And again, the point of this as well is this is just a 30,000-foot view with what Andrew does and like what his firm can do. Like I said, I've been like thrilled. I mean, I don't know how else to describe it. I feel like really fortunate to know Andrew and like the stuff that they've done. And I think that everyone can get their own, opinion meeting directly with him, but most importantly, spend some time getting to know him and how the trust and the wills and all that stuff can be basically blanket covered all at once. And it can really, the cost is so small compared to what it will benefit you, especially when you own, some real estate. It'll end up benefiting you like massively in big league. So that's my highest and best recommendation. That's why I had him on today. So sound good? Anybody got any thoughts before you get rolling? Like I said, what I'll do is I will upload this and I will send an email out to everybody, and then of course I'll put his information on there. And if you would like, I even put it in our little notes. If you'd like a kind of a one-on-one or a group chat introduction, just reach out to me and Zane individually. I'll start a group chat with you and Andrew and I, and then y'all can just kind of take it from there and then begin that conversation if it makes sense for you. Especially, like I said, we're all buying property. That's the whole point for us in all different stages of life. I have a trust. I've got the LLCs, the whole thing. I cannot recommend it anymore. Especially as time goes on. Like again, if I'm hunting in the jungle and have a bad day, I don't want my children to be tied up in probate for a couple of years. Like that seems crazy. So Andrew can handle it, and that's why we have him on here today. And he's just a partner of ours. So sound good?
All right. Well, thank you, Nolan, for having me on. Good to visit
Yeah.
with everybody else. And yeah, y'all have a great evening.
Sounds great. Yeah, I'll get this rolling, Andrew. Again, thanks for the time, man. Really, really appreciate it. Everybody, Dave and Richard and Zane. And I see Andrew on here. I see Barbara, JD, Max, Grant, everybody, John, Adam. Thank you, everybody, for being here. I think this is an important piece. And some of y'all have already maybe taken action on this in the past. I really recommend, if I'm going to be transparent, I don't have any dog in this fight. It's more about for everybody to utilize Andrew's talents and skills and expertise in their own life. And maybe Andrew's not the guy for you, but I really recommend you at least reach out to him and just talk with him. You have nothing to lose. You have no downside because that kind of stuff is a real thing. Taxes are going up. Exposure to litigation is getting higher. Like this guy is a professional, and I just recommend you getting 30 minutes with him to see if it's a good fit for you and your life and your business and your family. So that's my opinion. Sound good, everyone?
Thanks, Nolan.
All right.
Thanks, Andrew.
Thank you, everybody, for making
Y'all
it.
take
Thank
care.
you all. Thanks again, Andrew.
Thanks,
All
guys.
right.
Talk to you guys
Bye,
next
y'all.
time. Thanks, Andrew. See ya.
Okay.